Hello to you. Hello to you and welcome. I do hope you're well. A very warm welcome to this A-level religious ethics revision session. I'm Ben Wardle and today we're looking at the joyful topic that is meta-ethics. And whenever you think meta-ethics, you need to think meta means mega, big ethics. We're talking about the big ethics. You've got meta-ethics up here, big, whoop, 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 above the normative ethics. They're normal, they're quite boring. You know, your natural law, situation ethics, utilitarianism, Kantian ethics, you name it. Virtue ethics, it's down there. Meta ethics, however, is the big one, the big questions. Now, despite it being the big one, it's actually quite new. It actually came about as a result of World War II, the horror and the atrocity of World War II. People started to say, well, hang on, what on earth is ethics actually doing for us? Why on earth are we in this situation where we've got these ethical theories trying to get us to do good, and yet we have got this awful Holocaust that's happened, this awful war that's happened? They were saying, where is our goodness? Where are we actually getting our morality from? Now, of course, it all kicked off then, got mega, if you like, after World War II, but this has been a big issue, a big question in ethics for centuries. We can throw it all the way back to Plato and Aristotle. Plato's form of the good, the idea there must be some objective goodness out there in the universe which is in charge and controlling all of goodness. Whereas Aristotle then saying goodness is not something which corresponds to a single form, and so that would suggest goodness is subjective. It's subjective, of course, for him to the telos, to what something fulfills. If it can fulfill its individual unique purpose, then to him, then it would be good. So meta-ethics, and we're going to be breaking this down into the three schools of thought, if you like, within meta-ethics: the naturalism movement, the intuitionism movement, and the emotivism movement. Meta-ethics is all about the big question about the good. Can we know the good? Should it matter? Is it more important that we are interested in meta-ethics, or is it more important that we're interested in normative ethics? So big questions, big concepts. Let's do it, I say. So let's start by talking about ethical naturalism, and it's the idea that the good exists. It is an objective property, so the good does indeed exist, and it is knowable through nature. Now, it's not often that natural law and utilitarianism agree. However, in this very rare situation, we can see them as similar, because natural law sees the good as knowable through nature, and utilitarianism sees the good as knowable through nature. The fact that we desire pleasure, that is making it the good. Pleasure is the good because we naturally desire it. It's a product of our experience. And similarly, natural law, the idea of having this goodness in nature, right reason in accordance with nature, that nature reveals God's goodness. And of course, within a Christian point of view, God represents goodness. If God is manifest, if his goodness is manifest through nature, then that speaks volumes. It says a lot for us about where good is to be known from. So what we see here is an agreement which is unprecedented, that they're actually both agreeing that the good is knowable through nature. Now, we can link this in to Bradley. Bradley believed that through nature we can know the good, and it's about looking around at the world around you and going, what's my place in nature? How can I know what the good is for me? So it's using nature, the natural world we are a part of, to understand your place, your purpose, and what goodness is. So it is knowable through nature, whether that is, Jeremy Bentham would say, because it tells us what we desire, what we want, and that is the good, or because for a religious person, for Aquinas, for natural law, because it's nature that reveals God's goodness to us and what is right, what is good. Now, however, we have the issue that comes in here. of the naturalistic fallacy. And we've talked about this when we've talked about normative ethics, that just because something is natural and we desire it or we want it, it doesn't make it good. And this comes from this criticism comes from G.E. Moore. I almost forgot his name then, that's horrific. G.E. Moore, don't you forget it. G.E. Moore, the naturalistic fallacy. He was saying, well, hang on, just because you desire pleasure, why on earth does that mean it's good? You know, it could actually be a bad thing. There is no reason to say that because it's natural, it's good. Making that jump is not okay, because we can still ask the question, so pleasure is natural and it's desirable, but is it good? So he proposed instead the intuitionism movement. Intuition is that good is knowable on its own. You can't know it through anything else, because if you're associating anything else with the good, we're always then asking the question, but is it good? So I'm saying, right, what's known through nature is the good. You can then still ask, but is it the good? If I'm saying good is knowable through this reason, you could always ask the question, is it good? Whereas good, is it good? Well, yes, because it's good. It's about it being its own independent entity. In the same way, and this is where the intuition bit comes in the same way that we know yellow is yellow, you know, how can you describe yellow without saying, well, it's yellow? The good is knowable in the same way, that we can only come to know the good as the good, not as something that is good. The good is the good. So goodness is a very simple idea. It's not associated with other things. It's not dependent on other things and other ideas. The good is the good. End of. So it can't be known through empirical facts. In the same way that obviously someone using naturalism would say, you know, oh, well, through our senses we know that the good is desirable or the good does this. No. For him, it's intuitionism. We can only know it as self-evident in our own intuition. So we can link that in to the is-ought arguments of David Hume, and the idea that you can't say something is good, you know, we're only saying oughts, and so we can link those together. So it does take Hume's is-ought challenge to naturalistic ethics seriously, and there is widespread agreement on moral intuition. So we could say, okay, intuition is right, because we all seem to have this common understanding of the good. If it was about empiricism, we'd be making different judgments. And of course you could say, well, look at normative ethics, they're all very different. But because it's intuition, we all have this common understanding of what the good is. And that supports the idea that it does exist, as the intuitionists would suggest. And it then defends the existence of moral facts. If we say the good exists as the good, it shows there is objective morality. It does exist and it is its own independent entity. However, we see the subjective argument doesn't really stack up, because people can be subjective in their intuitions and people can have different intuitions on a topic. So actually, does it protect us from it being too subjective? It's also not clear what your intuition is. We could say, well, where does your intuition come from? What is the source of it? What's its origins? How do we know that it's actually reliable? We could say it's the idea of an extra ability, not from the senses, is far-fetched. In our everyday understanding, in terms of our knowledge about science, for example, we use the empirical method. So why would it be that when we then talk about the good, we suddenly go, okay, so 99.9% of the time we use empiricism, but just this time we're switching it up a bit? Why? Why would you not just continue to use empiricism? Why would you suddenly say, well, no, actually, the good is only known through intuition as the good itself? And then finally, the third movement. So we've had naturalism and Bradley, we've had intuitionism and Moore, and then we've got emotivism. And naturalism and intuitionism both see the good as a thing. It objectively exists, whether you know it through nature or through your intuition. Emotivists go, hang on a minute, they come along and they go, wait, what? They are saying that there are no moral truths. Moral statements are saying that something is good are only expressing an emotion or an opinion. Okay? So they're saying there's no moral facts. It is all about whether you can verify something. So if we throw it back to your philosophy studies and the verification principle, the idea of analytic and synthetic statements, the idea that for something to be verified, it needs to be empirically provable and you need to be able to see it. Now, because we can never prove goodness, this is the important bit. So we can say, okay, so through empiricism, you can say that the nature, what is natural, is good. But you cannot prove that. That depends on faith, on a belief that God manifests through nature, or on a belief that what we desire is good. There is no proof to show that. And that is a really key point to remember. There is no proof for it. And so any moral statements are not verifiable. They are meaningless. Ethics is essentially factually meaningless. It is about conveying an opinion, suggesting a view. It's approving or disapproving of something. It can never be seen as having authoritative, objective credibility, and to meet the criteria that the verification is put forward for a statement to be seen as significant and factual. And so that would undermine, A.J. Ayer's verification principle here would undermine the whole idea of meta-ethics. It's like, well, it's pointless because you can never prove it, so it's meaningless. And so, I mean, if we start evaluating already now, we could be saying, well, whilst ethics might have meaning to you as an individual in your form of life, in your way of living, that's fine. But objectively, we can never say that we've got proof about what goodness is. We've never got an ethical statement that is truly meaningful because it can't be proved, because it cannot meet the criteria of the analytic synthetic verification. And the word evince is used by Ayer to talk about ethical statements. They show an emotional state. Now, he's not completely writing them off. He's not saying they're a load of shit. What he is saying, though, is that they can only evince something. They can only point to an opinion or a feeling, as opposed to being that objective, accurate, verifiable truthfulness. So we've got naturalism and intuitionism. Different, yes, but united that good is a thing we can talk about. And then you've got the emotivists over here who are saying, no, it's not verifiable, it's not meaningful, sorry, but you're evincing something, you're making a statement. That could be relevant to your form of life, that could be relevant to your outlook, and we'll be talking about hair and blicks in a minute. But when we talk about it scientifically, objectively, the idea of the good is undermined, and so meta-ethics serves no purpose because it's all about opinion, not objectivity. And meta-ethics, asking what the good is therefore devoid of all meaning in every sense of the term. So can we see ethical terms as objective and meaningful? This conversation leads us to ask about, well, shared moral values. If we all share certain moral values, then would that mean ethics are objective and meaningful? Because if everybody is in agreement, if it unites all people in a mindset, in a belief, then that would suggest to us that yes, it helps. If we can have a standard, if we can have like an ethical truth about what the good was, for example, that would help. And then situations like the Holocaust, when people are saying, oh, well, I thought I was doing good, blah, 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 it can't happen because we've got a very clear standard and setup for what the good actually is. Moral progress as well is an important point to be made. There is considerable progress made in morality. If you throw it back to the slave trade, for example, throw it back to the days of racism, homophobia, all of these awful things, Now, if we're saying progress has been made on these issues, we must be saying there is some sort of standard of morality. We're saying there is a goodness. If we're saying progress has been made, bad things have stopped, we have evolved our morality in a good way, then what is it that is good about our morality? And how do we judge that? How do we see progress has been made? How do we know those standards are there, they exist, and that they are being met and built on, and they have credibility? And the argument is there must be some sort of objective goodness that exists. Now, obviously, you could say, hang on, all the different normative theories suggest to us that no, that is not the case, because we've all got so many different contradictory and conflicting normative ethical theories. Kant saying you can't use your emotion, situation ethics there, embracing the love. You know, man must be disciplined, for by nature he is raw and wild. Natural law utilitarianism saying what is natural is actually a good thing. So there's all these contrasts and contradictions. So you could say actually it's just a hopeless search for the one that works for you. And so your morality, your standards of morality are fixed to your form of life. So in the UK we're saying, yeah, okay, we've realised those attitudes to homosexuality were wrong. In other countries, in some Middle Eastern countries, in some Islamic nations, homosexuality is still seen as an absolute sin, punishable by the death penalty. And so it's subjective to your form of life, because there's no agreement on what goodness is and what it ought to be. But then this leads us on to the point, well, isn't there a need for a standard? Things like World War II, atrocities, and all these disasters of where moral judgments have been twisted, and people have used things as excuses to justify horrific treatment of people. Surely, because normative ethics are so subjective, because there's so much disagreement, different discussions and ideas, we need to set the standard, and it's meta-ethics that would allow us to do that, because it would help us to understand, well, what is the good, how is it known, and then how then can everybody apply it and use it and do it in their daily lives. But of course, we have problems with this approach, and we can start with the problems of using naturalism. So it's relying, for some of them, on telos. So natural law depends on a telos behind nature. We're saying, okay, goodness is known naturally. That means there is some sort of purpose in nature. Now, existentialism, so that's a new age philosophy movement, big thing in the 20th century. Jean-Paul Sartre, Simone de Beauvoir, going for this voice, I don't know what it is, but there we go, sounds a bit Russian. This movement was saying, no, there's no telos, there's no purpose. It is up to you to decide. Everything is up to you. And that would actually suggest meta-ethics is wrong, because it's up to the individual, to their form of life, it's their blick, as Hare would say. It's so subjective to you and personal choice that you don't know it through nature. It doesn't objectively exist, so that undermines the idea we can know the good, and instead it's a subjective statement of opinion, of personal choice. And then obviously the naturalistic fallacy criticises naturalism there, because we're saying just because it's natural, does that really mean it's good? And is it going to be interpreted by everybody in the same way? Cicero, there will be one law eternal, binding upon all people at all times. Well, Cicero, I've got news for you. It's not happening, is it? You know, there's so much subjectivity. I see homosexuality as natural, as part of the created order in the world. Someone else would disagree. There will be people that would say it's absolutely the most unnatural thing ever. So how can we say, right, who's got the right interpretation of nature? How can we say there's just one when there's so many different people with so many different cultures, perspectives, forms of life and belief systems that are out there? So we could therefore say that morality is subjective. We could say, well, there is a lack of shared moral values. Some people say love is important, some people say duty, some people can't speak, some people believe in God, others don't. it's subjective. Although to counter that, you could say we try and create a standard. The UN Convention on Human Rights, for example. John Hicks called for a global theology. We want to set standards. The universal application of the golden rule. We could but then say the idea of trivialization, because if we're saying that morality is subjective, does that trivialize it? Especially with the emotivist saying that it has no meaning, ethical statements have no meaning. Is that undermining our morality? Does that then essentially say, right, we're free to do what you want? Go on then, treat yourself, go wild. Does that then just justify anything? Is it not important for the human race that we actually have some sort of standards, that we have some setup and guidelines and rules that can unite us and ensure that we do work together for a certain aim? And we could then link in prescriptivism. So Hare's view that when we make a statement, he was challenging the emotivists. He said, hang on, when you're making a statement, you are not just expressing an emotion. So this would go against the emotivist point of view. He's saying it's not just expressing emotion. You actually do believe that what you're saying is right. And so he said prescriptivism is the best way to describe our morality. We have a view that we seek to prescribe to others and the world, because if you're doing it, and if you think about Kant's hypothetical categorical, the universalization of maxims, if you're doing it, then surely you think everybody should be doing it because it's the right way. So ethical statements are a little bit more than just an opinion for him. They are a prescription. So if you're saying killing is wrong, you're not just saying, well, I think it's wrong, so I'm not going to do it, but you can. You're saying something a bit more significant there. And so surely you could argue that supports the need for a meta-ethics, because we are not just making statements of opinion, we are asserting something about a universal truth. And so meta-ethics enables that because it defines goodness and what it means to us all. However, Mackey would argue back, so he'd support the emotivist. So we've got sort of a Hare and a Mackey head-to-head going on here, punch up. He said, although he was writing about the same time as Hare, but a little bit earlier, he said that we just have subjective values. So you could then maybe say, okay then, so what we have to conclude is that normative ethics are all subjective. It's all about a form of life. But, so that's the right way, because that's where we can act and apply morality. That is easier to do, that is better to do than seeking to make a statement about the world as a whole. But we've got to say, if I believe in natural law, it's not just for me, I believe that is the real truth. And so I do believe, even if I'm not telling you, you've got to follow natural law, you've got to follow natural law, I do believe that it is the right way to live. Not just for me, but for everybody. And so to just say morality is limited to a form of life doesn't really take into account the fact people believe, Hare's view, they are prescribing a morality. They know the truth. They know the right way to approach morality. So we then have to ask, so is this question that we've just been asking, what is the good? Is it known naturally? Is it known through intuition? Or is it merely just a subjective value? Which would be the view of, the emotivists of Mackey. Is that actually the defining question? Was it worth me spending 23 minutes of your day going on at you about it? This is the question. So it's all about asking, are meta-ethics more important than normative ethics? Which one is better? Are we wanting to simply describe and talk about quite an abstract concept, or do we want to get down and dirty and actually deal with the applied ethics and put things into practice? So you could say that what is the good is the key question, because you need to know what the good is. If you talk about utilitarianism, If Mill didn't think pleasure was the good, he wouldn't have devised a philosophic calculus, a hedonic calculus, a whole ethical theory. If Aquinas didn't think that nature revealed the good, that was where goodness was found, he wouldn't have bothered with his tiers of law. He wouldn't have bothered with his primary precepts and his synderesis and all of that work he did. So it's important that you know that the what is the good forms the basis for a normative ethics theory, because that theory then seeks to apply that understanding of the good to somebody's everyday life and everyday experience. And it is important to ask, because if an objective morality exists, it's important we work to know what it is, and then that could help to determine a universal morality. So the question of whether there is an actual good, a God-given standard, if you like, that is important to people. However, you could say, no, it's not, because ethics is all about your form of life. It's subjective. It's about a personal opinion and preference. And so it's more about the theory, because it's about you, your personal view, your form of life, and your application of that view in your everyday living. So you could say the normative ethics are more important. No objective morality exists, so it's not worth talking about. Instead, you've got the form of life of situation ethics. You've got the form of life of natural law. You've got the form of life of Kantian ethicists. And they all exist, and so the important thing is to study them, because that's how people live their lives. That's where morality gains its meaning, in their own language game, in their little bubble, not on some big level, because the emotivist would say that doesn't exist. This is me crossing it out, by the way. Just, doing my exercises now. And we could then say, what shall I do is more important than knowing what the good actually is. So the question is remote and complex. And let's be honest, are we ever going to find agreement on it? Because the normative ethics are so conflicting and so contradictory. So, you could say that that's why we need metaethics, because it's actually not helpful to have so many different theories. We need to establish a clear morality. But you could say that actually it's about what you should do. You're never going to get an answer to metaethics. Get out of the lecture theatre, start writing essays about the good, and do it. And the way that we do it is in the normative ethical theories. However, you could then argue, of course, that we only know what we should do once we know what goodness actually is. Because, as we said, the metaethics forms the basis for the normative ethics. So although it's the megabit above it, without that, how would you have your normative ethics? If Bentham didn't think that happiness and pleasure was the good thing, why would he have devised a theory? If love wasn't seen as the only good to Joseph Fletcher, why would he have created an ethical theory about it? So you need to know that understanding of the good to have a credible moral theory. But then we have to ask, well, is that just subjective to the form of life, to that person's world outlook? Or actually, is it more about them expressing something objective that we should all buy into and believe? So, I'm sorry, but that was a whirlwind of metaethics. I feel I was a bit circular there. Remember, if you're writing an essay on it, you need to be very clear. Make your point, make your evidence, explain it, respond to it, evaluate it, and link it to your question. So make sure you're very clear. So you say metaethics is a big problem, because without knowing what good is, moral theories wouldn't exist. That could be your point, your next point. However, it's more about action as opposed to asking. But then you could say, well, action is so contradictory, we need to establish an objective morality. But then you could say, well, ethical language is relative to your form of life. It's got no innate objective meaning, and so it's all subjective. So it's no point asking what the good is. It's all about what does it mean to you. What is your personal blick, your personal perspective on the matter? It's a great topic. It really gets all the ethics involved. It goes to the heart of the question, and it challenges you to ask what caused all these ethical theories. What is the good? What is the point of it all? So thank you very much for joining me. It's been a pleasure as always. You can follow me on Instagram, benwardle_, or on Twitter at benwardleuk. Thank you very much for your company. Have a good day. Bye bye.